Alongside Spider-Verse and Endgame, The Flash is probably one of my most anticipated movies of all time. Now, that's because growing up, The Flash was my third favorite superhero. So I was highly anticipating this movie, and I stalked it in the same way that Edward stalked Bella. I followed it all the way from its announcement in the old DCU slate of movies that had stuff like Nightwing, Batgirl, and Lobo in it, which RIP Batgirl, you almost made it out of the trenches. So I continued the movie from there all the way through its writer changes, director changes, delays, and Ezra Miller's five-star GTA crime spree. And at the end of the day, I finally got around to seeing the movie. I bought my ticket, I went to go see it, and I left the theater thinking I enjoyed myself, but the movie was just okay. It was very mid, and it was very disappointing because I wanted the movie to be great because I was very much looking forward to this movie. And the longer that I sat with it over this past month, I realized how much I had issues with this movie, how many things that I saw flaws with that really hurt it in its execution. And I felt like I wanted to talk about them. So with the movie now being out on digital for you to see, I'm going to go into complete spoilers about The Flash and talk about everything that I felt made the movie not as good as it was, and talk about, what I think could have been better that would have made the movie much more entertaining in my own personal opinion. So if you haven't seen the movie, it's out on digital. You can buy it, rent it, use other reputable means, I'm sure, to go and watch the movie, and come back here and hear what I have to say, and I'll be curious to hear what you thought. So, that being said, let's get into it. For those of you unaware, the Flash movie is heavily inspired by the Flashpoint Paradox comic. It is one of the most, if not the most notorious Flash comic ever written. In that story, Barry Allen travels back in time to save his mother from being murdered by his arch nemesis, the Reverse Flash, aka Your Bot Thawne, and stop his father from being framed for her murder. Now, the Flash movie does adapt that same premise, minus the aspect about his arch nemesis being the one that took his mother's life, which I will talk more about that later on in this video. Now, when Barry does this, it warps time, creating a paradox effect that changes the world. And this is where I feel the first major issue in the Flash movie comes from. The world that Barry creates in that movie is better than the world that he left behind. And that is a massive problem, because the biggest sell of the Flashpoint Paradox comic that it's adapting is the fact that when Barry altered time, his personal life was better than the one he left behind, but the world surrounding him and the lives of all of his friends that he cared dearly about had been completely ruined to an irreparable degree. And I'm going to tell you about what that was. In the comic, when Barry altered time, what happened is that Aquaman and Wonder Woman were both king and queen of Atlantis and Themyscira respectively, and the two of them were secretly having an affair behind Aquaman's wife Mara's back. And when Mara found out, she got into a fight with Wonder Woman, resulting in Wonder Woman killing Mara, which sparked a war between Atlantis and Themyscira that's now ravaging the world. Superman, instead of crash landing in Kansas and being raised by the Kent family, he crash landed in the middle of Metropolis and was arrested by the government and locked in a cell for his entire life. And probably the saddest and most messed up and interesting thing that happened is that instead of Thomas and Martha Wayne dying in Crime Alley, resulting in Bruce becoming Batman, Bruce is the one who died in Crime Alley, and his father became a darker, more brutal Batman that uses weapons like guns. And his mother lost her mind and became a villain called Yo-Yo, which is the equivalent of the Joker for the Flashpoint Paradox timeline. And that was all very interesting. We saw how messed up the world is that Barry created in Flashpoint. Although he was personally happy, the world was messed up, and it showed him the lesson that he needs to fix things. But nevertheless, Barry, being the hero that he was, he still wanted to save this world because he believed it deserved to be saved anyway. The movie, on the other hand, doesn't have any of this. The world that Barry ends up creating is nicer than the world he left behind. In this world, Victor never got into his accident and became cyborg, so both of his parents are still alive and he's on track to join the NFL. Wonder Woman never left Themyscira, or she wasn't born. They don't clarify which it is, but there's no record of her in man's world interfering with anything. Aquaman was never born because his dad got married to someone else and never met Queen of Atlantis, and Batman, who's now Michael Keaton in this universe for the cameo purposes, is now a hermit that lives in Wayne Manor, but he mentions that Gotham has been protected well enough that it's more of a utopia rather than the crime-ridden cesspool that we all know it and love it for being. So the world he created is significantly nicer, and his life is significantly nicer as well, because granted, Barry's in the wrong time and he's interacting with younger versions of his parents and himself, than he should be, his life is better. He's in college. He's going to be going on a date with Iris, which is something that Barry in the present had wanted to do. So everything is so much nicer. Granted, Supergirl ended up crashing to Earth and being locked in prison, similar to how Superman was in the Flashpoint comic. But aside from that, the world is so much nicer. And then the only negative aspect that I'm sure most of you are probably thinking about who've seen the movie is Zod. But Zod wasn't Barry's fault. Zod coming to Earth wasn't something that happened because Barry caused the paradox to happen. It's something that always happened in the movie, in their time. Because Zod came to Earth, the only difference was that Superman was there to fight him. So that's why they wanted to go and free Supergirl in this movie, so they had someone to go and confront Zod, which I have a problem with Zod being the ultimate paradoxical thing that they can't win, because I'll get into it later, but it's just kind of irking me. So Barry didn't cause a bunch of catastrophic stuff to happen, so the entire movie, Barry is just trying to save this timeline, specifically because his mom is alive. He even says so in the movie, which isn't correct. Barry should feel bad that he's messed up everything and want to fix what he did wrong. That's the core of Flashpoint. It shows Barry's character growth and understanding that his mother has to die, that he has to let her go despite not wanting her to, that this world is worse because of his selfish decision. But the world isn't worse because of his decision. It's better. And all they really have to do is kill Zod, and everything is fine in this world. There's nothing else wrong with it. If Zod dies, Barry could have stayed in this timeline permanently and not had to reset everything. And that is a massive mistake. By taking that core element out of the storyline, it really impacts the movie in such a negative way that I don't really understand how no one saw that being a problem. Alongside the lackluster world building that I just talked about, there's lackluster character development as well. Most of the characters in this movie either don't have a deep and fleshed out character arc, or they don't learn their lesson by the end of the movie. So starting off with our Caped Crusader himself, Batman, he doesn't really have a character arc in the movie. He's kind of a hermit at the beginning. That Barry asks him for help. He says no for a little bit. He changes his mind. He becomes Batman again. And there's one scene where you see him return to form, and he's like, I kind of missed being what I am. I kind of miss being Batman. And that's a really good scene. I really love that scene in itself. Seeing Michael Keaton gain joy from returning to form as Batman was very pleasant to see. Even though I'm not that big of a fan of the Tim Burton movies, I still enjoyed seeing that for the very brief moment that it was. And that's kind of really it. There's nothing else more detailed for him to do for the rest of the story, which is a shame as opposed to his counterpart in the comic book storyline. You see, in the comic, Thomas Wayne ended up being Batman, as I mentioned before, and he helps Barry save the world purely because he knows that when Barry fixes everything, Bruce will be alive instead of him. And the story ends with Thomas writing a letter for Barry to give to Bruce when he fixes everything that he screwed up with history. And the story ends with Bruce reading the letter that his father wrote for him and actually crying and telling Barry that he's a great delivery man for being able to give him this letter that gives him closure about his parents passing. It's a beautiful end to an excellent story. And this movie just doesn't have any of that. There's no resolution to Batman's story. He kind of just ends in an endless loop of being killed by one of Zod's lackey minions. And it's just a bunch of nothingness. The same goes for Supergirl. Supergirl actually has a really interesting arc in the movie. It's the same arc that Superman goes through in the comic, but nevertheless, it's still a good arc. But it happens in one scene. When they save Supergirl, the Flash asks her, he's like, hey, we need you to help fight your Uncle Zod so we can save the world. And she's like, why would I do that? Because I was locked in prison by you humans for my entire life. I'm not helping you. And then she leaves. And in the next scene, she sees Zod kill a bunch of innocent people. And then she comes back and is like, hey, I saw Zod murder some innocent people. I changed my mind. I'm going to help you beat him. That's it. That's the whole character arc for the whole movie. And it's just like, although you had a good arc there showing Supergirl contemplate over the fact that humans have treated her so poorly, but she needs to learn to get over that because there are still innocent people there to save, we don't really do anything with it. It just gets resolved in that one scene, which, by the way, she has no dialogue in that scene. She just sees Zod kill people and then comes back and is like, all right, I'm going to help you now. That's it. And as for our main man, Barry Allen himself, his arc, obviously, is learning to live with the fact that his mother has to die and that he shouldn't mess with time. So that's what he does until the last scene of the movie. You see, at the beginning of the movie, we are told that Barry's father is going to get a retrial for the crime of killing his wife. And they used advanced technology to fix the camera footage from when his father went to the convenience store to buy the tomato soup that he needed, and his head was down, so that was his alibi for where he was for when his wife was murdered. But because his face wasn't in the camera, they had nothing. Now, when Barry goes back to let his mother die, because the way he circumvented saving her is that he added a can of tomato soup to her grocery bag so she wouldn't forget the soup, resulting in his dad going to that place to get the soup. So he takes it away. Excuse me. Tomato sauce. They were making some pasta. Sorry. So he takes the can out of the, bucket, cart, whatever. You know what I mean. So his mom would end up sending his dad out, so she would end up dying again, and his dad would get framed for the murder. But no, they couldn't let it end there, because why would, the movie end with our main character learning his lesson and developing a character arc that's satisfying? No. What happens is Barry lets his mom die, but he rearranges the shelves in the store so the tomato sauce that his dad needed to grab is now on the top shelf, so his face will be in the camera after he has, gone to the store. So now, in the present with the retrial, they can clearly see that Henry Allen, Barry's dad, was at the store, so he gets set free from prison. And I was just sitting there in the theater, absolutely baffled at the fact that we just watched an entire movie where this man had to learn he should not mess with time. He has to let things happen and he has to move on emotionally. And then the movie ends with him messing with time and getting what he wants. And sure, the cliffhanger at the end where Bruce is now George Clooney, you could argue that Barry's like, oh no, I have to fix this. But we're not getting a Flash 2 where he keeps trying to fix time and everything so his dad is out of prison. That doesn't happen, and that would be absolutely stupid to redo the same movie just with a slightly different premise. So he learns nothing by the end of the movie. He learns absolutely nothing. Bruce just looks like George Clooney now. His dad's out of prison. That's it. It's so infuriating to me that they would decide to do that because, again, the Flashpoint Paradox comic ends with him just letting his mom die. And it's more impactful there and more sad because Barry's mom was killed by his arch nemesis. So when Barry has to travel back in time and let his mother die, he's letting the man who's made it his entire life to destroy his own life and make him miserable take the one thing that he loves and cares about more than anything else. He has to let the man that he hates and he knows hates him back kill his own mother. And this movie has nothing equivalent to that, and it ruins Barry's character arc by having him do something that gets his dad out of prison. It's absolutely ludicrous that they end his character arc like that. But hey, I guess Barry not learning his lesson is better than the antagonist not having anything to do with the movie at all. So, we technically have two antagonists in the Flash movie, Zod and the Black Flash. If you didn't remember the Black Flash being in the movie, I wouldn't blame you because he's in one jump scare at the beginning of the movie and then one scene at the end of the movie where he exposition dumps and then dies. That's the only screen time this villain has in the entire movie, and it's absolutely ridiculous to me. I don't understand how they could have decided to have a villain that's supposed to be the main antagonist that's caused the events of this movie to happen just not be there. So let's dive into it. So when Barry travels back to the present after saving his mother, he gets attacked by the Black Flash, and he ends up 10 years prior to the events of where he was trying to get. So now he is in the time frame where Zod is going to attack Earth, and he gets his powers for the first time, which it's ridiculously convenient that Barry became the Flash slightly before the events of Man of Steel. They write it out of the movie in a scene that ends up not mattering much later on by the end, which I'll talk about later. But Barry is supposed to get his power slightly before Zod attacks Earth. So when he realizes when it was, for whatever reason, they had to make the whole thing of Barry not being the Flash complicated, because originally, when Barry travels back to the present in the comics, he just loses his powers because he was never struck by lightning. It's that simple. But because they wanted two Barrys in the movie, when he ends up 10 years in the past, he meets his younger self and is like, oh, even though I still have my powers right now, you're not going to get struck by lightning, so there's a possibility that when I travel back to the present, I might lose my powers. And it's like, oh, okay. So then he takes his younger self to the CCPD to get struck by the bolt of lightning so that he can get his powers. However, his younger self is afraid of getting struck by the lightning, so both of them get struck by the lightning, and it transfers the powers that Barry originally had to his younger self. Why does it do that? I have absolutely no idea. They don't ever explain it. So now Barry's out of powers and his younger self has powers. Fast forward to the end of the movie, future Barry gets his powers back, younger Barry has his powers, the two of them are teaming up, fighting against Zod with Supergirl and Batman, and they can't win the fight. So they decide to travel back in time to defeat Zod, knowing how the fight is going to go so that Batman and Supergirl don't die and that they can save the world. However, they can't win. And then future Barry sees younger Barry constantly trying to fix everything, and he's like, I finally get it. I learned the lesson of the movie until I unlearned it a few minutes later that I have to let my mom die and I can't mess with time. So his younger self is getting more beaten and battered, which I do like this element of it. His younger self, through traveling back in time and trying to save Batman and Supergirl multiple times throughout going through this war field, his body gets covered in like ash and crust and like gets stabbed with a bunch of pieces of shrapnel and everything, and that forms him into the Black Flash, which I think is really cool. However, that's when the older version of him shows up, the one that is the Black Flash. And he's like, I'm sorry, the me that saved our mom, I can't let you go back and let her die now. And I'm the one who pushed you into the 10 years in the past. And this leads to the most infuriating exposition dump that I hate. Because something that you need to know about me as a person, the worst thing when it comes to time travel stories that I cannot stand are time loops. I hate time loops with a burning passion, and this is the second time that the Flash has made a time loop based villain and not explained it and then be poorly written. I'm looking at you, Savitar, all right? So the reason the Black Flash exists is because the younger Barry constantly keeps traveling back in time trying to save Batman and Supergirl during the war with Zod that they have at the end of the movie, and this results in him becoming the Black Flash. However, why did Barry go 10 years in the past in the first time? Because this is the thing that people who write time loops always overlook. They never tell you the nexus point that started the time loop in the first place. This movie starts in the midst of the time loop, but we don't know what event happened that led into the time loop starting in the first place. So when Barry leaves after he saves his mother's life in the past, he's planning to go back to the present. Why did the original Barry Allen end up 10 years in the past and then create his younger self turning into the Black Flash, resulting in the Black Flash pushing his younger self 10 years into the past? Because he tells him, I had to push you 10 years into the past so that you would create me. But you shouldn't exist if he didn't end up 10 years in the past in the first place to lead you to exist so that you could make him make you exist. Do you understand how ridiculous it sounds, the way how convoluted everything I'm saying is? Because it's exactly how it feels when you watch it in the movie. He's like, oh, I had to do this to you so that you could create me, but then how were you created in the first place? And it's just like, it doesn't matter, we're not going to talk about that. And then he dies after he goes through this whole spiel, and it's stupid, and it's pointless, and it's a waste of a villain. Worst character in the entire movie. The concept is cool, having a alternate evil version of Barry Allen. That could have been interesting, but they don't do anything interesting with it, and I don't know why they even bothered putting it in the movie in the first place if they were going to do nothing with it. It's stupid. Now to our second antagonist of the movie, Zod. My problem with Zod is that they make Zod way too powerful in this movie, and it's ridiculous. Zod was beaten single-handedly by Superman, and so were his lackeys. So you're expecting me to believe that Supergirl, two Flashes, and a Batman can't beat Zod and his lackeys, so much so that it's like a nexus point, that it's a canon event, if you will, that they lose that fight? Bull fucking shit. I cannot believe that. The only reason Zod even stood a chance against Clark back in Man of Steel is because Clark broke his containment suit so he gained the same level of power as he did. And Clark was still able to beat him in the end. So, for those of you who aren't aware, Supergirl has had combat training on Krypton. And she is on Earth, exposed to the sunlight, gaining the same level of power as Clark had in Man of Steel. And she never breaks Zod's containment suit. So, why exactly is she losing to Zod? She even gets stabbed by him, which, by the way, I know that kryptonite is weak to Kryptonians. I'm very unsure if Kryptonian metal could pierce through their impenetrable skin once they've been hit with the sunlight. That's something that maybe someone can tell me down in the comments, but nevertheless, Supergirl can't beat Zod in a fight, which doesn't make any sense. All they had to do was just have her break the suit, and I could have bought that he had the ability to beat her with his skills. Would it still be sketchy? Sure. But at least I could have believed it more. They want me to expect that Zod and his two cronies that they can beat Supergirl, Two Flashes, and Batman, so much so that it's a fixed point in history that can't be changed. And I can't buy that. They're not that big of a threat. If you would have said that Darkseid came to Earth, that Barry created a timeline with no superheroes so that when Steppenwolf arrived, there was no one to stop him, I would have believed that. Steppenwolf arrived, got the mother box, summoned Darkseid, boom, game over. I could have bought that. Not Zod and his two cronies. I can't believe that in the slightest bit, and that being the core driving element that teaches Barry his lesson that he isn't supposed to mess with time is just stupid. I'm sorry, I can't buy it. You needed to write something better. Nothing against the people that worked on this movie, but I can't buy that as an individual. Maybe there are some other people out there who've seen the movie who think that works for them. I can't get over it. It's something that infuriates me, and I'll never, ever let it go. I know I've been pretty negative for the past however long this video was, but like I said, I did enjoy the movie. I was just really hoping that it could have been better. There were some things in the movie that people make fun of, like the CGI and stuff like that, which, yeah, that's laughably bad and it's, kind of campy and stuff like that. But I did enjoy aspects of this movie. There were a few moments that were funny. I actually really enjoy, the first, act of the movie where the Flash and Batman are working together to stop a bunch of criminals and save people. I thought that was really cool, especially the stuff with Batman. I love the blue cowl and the suit that they gave him. I know some people had issues with the CGI movements of his character. However, I really enjoyed seeing him move that way because it just kind of gave me the vibe of how Batman is able to move in the animated series and video games and stuff like that a real person just isn't really able to do. I think that was perfectly fine, and I'm looking forward to see how Andy Muschietti ends up directing the Brave and the Bold movie, because the Batman elements of this movie were the best parts of it. I love the Flash suit, not the Batman one that young Barry wore, but the main one that the real Barry wears with the red and everything. It's straight out of the New 52 comics, even with the lightning energy going through it and everything like that. It looks awesome. I really loved it. There were funny moments, not movies. In the movie, I very much enjoyed those comedic bits, like when Barry gets hit in the head at the beginning of the movie with a candy bar when he's trying to rush out to go save people. I found that very funny. Him trying to clean up his apartment to talk to Iris and everything. There were good moments in the movie that I did quite enjoy. But I can't help but wonder how this movie could have been better if it was written slightly differently. Even using the elements from the DCEU, because I understand that they didn't really have much to work with the past of this movie. Maybe there were actors that couldn't come back given all the shifting things and everything, how the plot ended up working out the way it did. So, I'm just imagining, what if there was a movie that used the storyline of the DCEU and brought in an interesting take? Using some of the elements from this movie in itself, Arthur Curry, the Aquaman, wasn't born, right? What if you used that and said because Aquaman wasn't born, there was no one to stop Orm from taking over the Seven Seas and launching his attack on humanity? That would be interesting. What if Diana never left Themyscira and stopped Ares? He could have continued to cause world wars throughout the course of history, leaving the world ravaged and beaten. What if, I was going to say what if about Batman, but I really think the Thomas Wayne story from the comic trumps anything ever. So I think they should have just went with that instead of just being Michael Keaton Batman from the Tim Burton movies. Like, Michael Keaton could have come back and been Thomas Wayne. I know before it revealed that he was going to be Bruce Wayne from the Tim Burton movies, that people thought he was going to be Thomas Wayne, and I was totally down for that because that would have been really cool to see. In regards to Supergirl, I think the story from the comic works very well. I just wish she had more time to flex her acting chops. I cannot speak towards the end of this video. Somebody help me. But nevertheless, you know, Sasha Calle is really great as Supergirl, and I love to see her return. And her giving her performance in this, if she had more time, she would have been so much more interesting. Hell, you could even bring in Zod as well. This would have made a more interesting and compelling movie in a world that's significantly more messed up than what we got, that would have shown Barry how much messing with time screws things up. You know, have him have to face off against Orm and Ares and Zod and hell, maybe even give the looming threat that like Steppenwolf or Darkseid's coming in. I don't know, just make the world dark and depressing so Barry understands why he has to change everything back. Make him the hero that I know that he is. Have him want to save everyone because it's the right thing and not because of his own selfish reasons. You know, this movie really had a lot to work through. It could have been an extremely heartfelt and beautiful superhero movie about a boy who wanted to save his own mother and has to let her die for the greater good. It would have been so fantastic to see. You know, I just really wish that it wasn't the way it was, you know? Because at the end of the day, although it pains me to say it, The Flash is just mediocre. So, I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. I'm curious if you agreed with me, disagreed, whatever. Let me know down in the comments below. If you made it to the end of this video, if you made it this far, I greatly appreciate you going through all of this. You know, I'm trying to make it out here as best as I can with the limited resources and skills that I've got. So I really appreciate you getting this far in the video. So I hope you have a fun time. And with that being said, I'm the innocent villain. Remember, folks, you're innocent until proven villainous, and I'll catch you next time.